gentlemen, boys and girls, today, got a great topic. We're recording this in February, so it is Black History Month. And if you saw the first video, you got a little insight on some very interesting things, very poignant topics, very important things to think about. So today we're going to continue with that, and we're going to explore how slavery, American slavery, affects us today in America, and quite frankly in the Western world, I think. So very important stuff. So please hit the like button and please subscribe so you get notifications for when I do this the next time, because I'm planning to tackle a lot of topics. This topic today is very appropriate for the time we're in. And so let's get started, shall we? So let me sit up here. Let me turn on these little lights. Look at that. Cool little thingies. Okay, and we're going to read and analyze the William Lynch letter. Okay, so let's get into it, and we'll stop and discuss, and we'll see how American slavery affects us today. And if it's still, well, let's explore it. Okay? So, this speech was delivered by William Lynch, on the bank of the James River in the colony of Virginia in 1712. Lynch was a British slave owner in the West Indies. He was invited to the colony of Virginia in 1712 to teach his methods to slave owners there. The term lynching is derived from his last name. Okay. So here we go. December 25th, 1712. Here's the letter. Gentlemen, I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord 1712. First I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. Okay, so let's talk about that first paragraph right there. Almost nothing new under the sun. He says newest but yet oldest methods. Now, if you do your research, Rome had slaves. And you can go back even further to ancient Egypt, and some of the techniques and things that are discussed in this letter were used back then. Okay, so let's continue. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasions. So there's your hanging. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for the maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I'm not here to enumerate your problems. I'm here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for 300 years. Let's stop there for a second. So, wrote this in 1712. It's now 300 years later, plus. And if you've been paying attention, if you're in the know, if you're unplugged in a way, you know that there are people waking up, right? and we'll talk about that another time. And maybe they're not waking up and acting appropriately yet. Some of the people that are waking up are young and they're angry, but people are waking up. So it's interesting that he said 300 years, and now it's 300 years later, with a little extra couple years there, but interesting. So let's move on. He says, my method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. That's interesting. Who are the overseers? We'll talk about that too. I have suffered a number of differences among the slaves and make the differences bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control. Interesting. So for those of you, maybe that you're young, if you've never heard this, keeping slaves is a big psychological operation. So, let's continue. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies and will work throughout the South. Take the simple little list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but it's there only because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations, and status on plantations. Attitudes of owners, whether the slaves live in the valley, on the hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. Let's stop there for a second. If you listen to any content creators, other content creators, or just people who happen to be black, and that you can tell that a big problem today in the black community is a lot of these problems. Envy, right? Some very successful black content creators are there's envy from other blacks. Let's just say it. And they try to take down and trash these guys that are successful. Now, is that a problem in other communities? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it does seem to be, and I'm just going to say it, a bigger problem in the black community. That envy, and you hear them, they say, oh, brother gets successful, and the other brothers try to tear him down. All right? Now, I've experienced that as a white guy, with other white guys, please. I mean, it's a problem, and that's why we're going to end this discussion with how it affects all of us. Okay? But look at this. This guy, Mr. Lynch, is basically explaining how they keep people dysfunctional, right, and envious of each other. He says distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation. Right? It's a problem. It's a problem today. Here we go. Let's continue. The black slaves, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-regenerating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use dark-skinned slaves versus light-skinned slaves. Ho!
Mr. Smith, are you telling us that when they talk about prejudice against darker-skinned people versus light-skinned people, that's a result of psychological manipulation from the slave days?
Yeah. It's a tactic. I am saying that. Light skin, black skin. So what is this guy Willie Lynch saying? He's saying pit black folks against each other in any way possible. Right? Create envy, create ageism, right? Young black male against the black male, right? Create dark skin versus light skin, etc. Okay, let's continue. He says, you must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. And that is a huge problem today. That's a huge problem among all of us. Feminism. Okay, and then you've got, what, we got, and then the men are, today, right, are starting to rebel. And it's a problem. So let's continue. Here's a big one, right? Continuing on, quote, you must also have your white servants. What? And overseers. Distrust all blacks. It is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love and respect and trust only us. Only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful of each other. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, that's just the first part. Let's go back to that white servants. Okay, so they a servant here is a paid employee. Okay. But they see, whoever William Lynch is, he sees himself as separate. Right? He sees himself, you got your white servants, you got your black slaves, and then there's us. He even says it, that the slaves will rely on only us and trust us. So who's the us today? I mean, you think these people just went away? I said, you think they're just going to give up their power and control? Well, what does he say earlier on? He said, what did he say? Ancient Rome would envy us. Right now, did the Romans just disappear? Or did they just change their, what are they doing now? What, they just all killed themselves? I mean, come on, people don't do that. Like, okay, we're Rome, our empire's done, boom, boom, boom. All right, no. You guys, come on, man. You know that there's still, these Romans still around. They don't call it, they don't say, we are Romans, right? Okay? So, that's something to explore, maybe for another time. Who are these people that see themselves different from the white servants? Now, who would be the white servants today? Well, police officers, teachers, middle management, right? And who runs, what would be, and if you guys have studied plantations at all back in the day, corporations today run just like them. Right? So you have hierarchies, you have people, and they dangle that carrot, right? And everybody's trying to get to that next level, get to that next level. I mean, my father worked for Kmart Corporation for years, ever since he was out of high school. And he believed he was going to work his way up and work his way up. And when he didn't do, he said some things that were very interesting one time. He went to a shareholders meeting, he said he didn't know where all these CEOs are coming from. Right? They don't even work for they didn't work their way up, they were just placed in these positions. They're just placed. And my father was encouraged to pursue an ageism lawsuit with other managers of the Kmart Corporation, right? Middle management and stuff like that, because he was being pushed out because he was getting older, right? The corporations need younger workers. They can pay them less and have them work longer hours, right? But my father didn't believe in suing, so he just kind of went along. But he did not, what can you say? He didn't play their game. He just wanted to do his job and come home and raise his family. And he wanted to move up through seniority. He thought that's how it's supposed to work, right? but that's not how it works. So these corporations, and I want to give a shout out to Camelot 331. This young man has a YouTube channel where he is exposing, oh my gosh, these different corporations, and he does not hold anything back. He's calling them out. So you want to check out his channel if you don't know already. Okay? So, yes, I am saying that the old plantations were a corporate system, and it's still in effect today. I am saying that. So let's move on. So they actually, these people actually, he's saying that they got white people to fear blacks, and that's still a problem today, clearly. Right? And if you see what's going on, I definitely question, a lot of these things in the media where they're, showing these white guys going roar and these black guys going roar, and they got everybody paranoid of each other, right? Well, this letter gives a little insight why that might be happening. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Here's the next one. It says, let's make a slave. It was the interest and business of slaveholders to study human nature, and the slave nature in particular, right? And it's been documented that there were, I guess, quote, scientists and researchers that were studying black folks back, 200, 300 years ago, and studying the psychology. So this is nothing new. You don't think these corporations, when they advertise and they want to sell you products and get you to do this, there's not psychological manipulation going on there. Absolutely is. And they've studied human nature, right? All right, but let's continue. Okay. To study human nature and slave nature in particular, with a view to practical results. I and many of them attained astonishing proficiency in this direction. So Willie Lynch is admitting that he's not just a slave owner, he studies these people, studies human nature. They had to deal not with earth, wood, and stone, but with men, and by every regard, let me start back. I and many of them attained astonishing proficiency in this direction. They had to deal not with earth, wood, and stone, but with men, and by every regard they had for their own safety and prosperity, they needed to know the material on which they were to work. So if you interpret this more in modern language, he's saying that the slave owners, they don't deal with like working and construction and stone, but they deal with dealing with people and how to manipulate the people, right? What do they call, in companies, they call it human resources, right? And you don't believe, trust me on this, right? A lot of these CEOs and stuff, they are trained on the art of manipulating people and keeping people, being able to control people. They you can go back to ancient Egypt and there's interpretations of some of the writings where they talk about manipulating people. So this is nothing new. Let's continue. Conscious of the injustice and wrong, they were every hour perpetuating and knowing what they themselves would do. Were they the victims of such wrongs? They were constantly looking for the first signs of the dreaded retribution. They watched, therefore, with skilled and practiced eyes, and it's talking about the slave owners and the controllers and the handlers, and learned to read with great accuracy the state of mind and heart of the slave through his sable face. Okay, I'm not sure what that means, but unusual sobriety, apparent abstractions, sullenness, and indifference indeed. Any mood out of the common was afforded ground for suspicion and inquiry. All right, so let us make a slave. Continuing on, what do we need? First of all, we need a black N-word man, a pregnant N-word woman, and her baby N-word boy. So family, let's continue. Keep that in mind, family. Second, we will use the same basic principle that we use in breaking a horse. So they see us as just animals. or black folks anyway. But again, I'm going to round it out. It affects all of us today. Okay, breaking a horse combined with some more sustaining factors. What we do with horses is that we break them from one form of life to another. That is, we reduce them from their natural state in nature, whereas nature provides them with the natural capacity to take care of their offspring. We break that natural string of independence from them and thereby create a dependency status. So let's stop there for a second. So he's talking about destroying the family, right? And he's talking about breaking the natural workings of a family, and instead of family and communities relying on each other, getting people to be dependent, having a dependent on the status. Okay? Can we say welfare system here? Right? So many, quote, minorities and stuff are on welfare. Right? They're dependent on the state. Right? So that sounds like what William Lynch had in mind that's going on today. I was listening to a guy who was telling, he was on YouTube, and he was just ranting, I guess, but he was saying he was a proud guy and he didn't want to be on welfare, and he had family to take care of, so he went out and got a job, and that job didn't pay enough, so he got 2 jobs. He's working a crazy amount of hours per week, 2 jobs. He still couldn't make more money with those 2 jobs than he could on welfare. So he went back, got on welfare. It was just more economically feasible for his family to do that. Okay, that shouldn't be. That's a system problem. And you don't think it wasn't purposely set up that way? It absolutely was. And God help us if they take away the welfare money from these people that have been weaned on it. Oof. Okay? So what this William Lynch is talking about, he's talking about getting people on welfare right here. And that still affects us today. And not just black folks, it affects a lot of people. All right, so let's continue. Okay, so he says, get them to create a dependency status so that we may be able to get them from useful production, to get from them useful production for our business and pleasure. What pleasure is he talking about here? Well, so I think this guy is pretty much a pervert and creep. Okay? But that's the harsh reality of what it was like with the slaves. Okay? And that goes back to Rome. I mean, you could buy, underage boys and girls in Rome for your pleasure. And this guy's referring to the Romans. And if you look into the people who started the Roman Empire, well, that might be for another time. We'll be here for 5 hours if we go into that. All right, so let's continue on. Here we go. Cardinal principles for making a Negro. For fear that our future generations may not understand the principles of breaking both of the beast together, the N-word and the horse. We understand that short-range planning economics results in periodic economic chaos. So that to avoid turmoil in the economy, it requires us to have breadth and depth in long-range comprehensive planning, articulating both skill-sharp perceptions. Okay, so what he's saying here is that he's about to talk about how to avoid having uprisings and problems, and of course, it's all about money and economics, right? So he's about to say how you pass on these psychological techniques. He says, we lay down the following principles for long-range comprehensive economic planning. Both horse and N-words is no good to the economy in the wild or natural states. Okay, so he doesn't want. They don't want black folks living. They don't want black folks to take care of themselves and live alone. Okay. So that's something to think about. Why they never? Why are all these Europeans going over to, and white folk going over to Africa to quote help them out? I'm gonna question that. Right? They're always up in their business. But I continue. But I digress. Here we go. It says, both must be broken and tied together for orderly production. He's talking about the horse and black folks. For orderly future, special and particular attention must be paid to the female and the youngest offspring. That's very interesting. Let's continue. Both must be crossbred to produce a variety and division of labor. Both must be taught to respond to a particular new language. Psychological and physical instruction of containment must be created for both. We hold the 6 cardinal principles as truth to be self-evident, upon the following: the discourse concerning the economics of breaking and tying the horse and the N-word together, all inclusive of the 6 principles laid about. Note, neither principle alone will suffice for good economics. All principles must be employed for orderly good of the nation. Accordingly, both a wild horse and a wild or natural N-word is dangerous, even if captured. For they will have the tendency to seek their customary freedom, and in doing so, might kill you in their sleep. Okay, well, now he's promoting fear, but he's all, you treat people badly, you're going to reap the consequences, right? He says you cannot rest. So what he's telling the slave owners is that they have to be on it all the time, right? They have to be doing these psychological tactics all the time. Okay? They sleep while you are awake, and are awake while you are asleep. They are dangerous near the family house, and it requires too much labor to watch them away from the house. Above all, you cannot get them to work in this natural state. Hence, both the horse and the N-word must be broken. That is, breaking them from one form of mental life to another. Again, psychologically breaking them. Okay, be aware. I mean, we're going to talk about this in future lessons, how music is used to psychologically manipulate people, etc., etc. It's all over the place. Okay, and I'm going to tell you right now, that the one reason why I'm so passionate about this is they're not just doing this to black folks these days. They're doing it to everybody. Okay? These days. Here we go. So they don't want you in your natural state. What is your natural state? To be, with your family and relying on each other, wives depending on their husbands. Right? They want you out of that. All right? So let's keep going. Hence, both the horse and the N-word must be broken. That is, breaking them from one form of mental life to another. Keep the body, take the mind. Keep the body and take the mind. Okay? I'm just going to let that marinate. Okay, let's continue. In other words, break the will to resist. Oh, man. They give us such toys, don't they? Video games, fancy cars. These contracts that a lot of these athletes and entertainers get, we don't know what's going on in the fine print. All right, they give them toys. What did Chris Rock say one time? Give them a bunch of bling bling, I won't use the rest of the language, but it's an old routine from the 90s. It was very funny. For those of you that are of a certain age, you'll probably remember that one. But now, the breaking process is the same for both the horse and the N-word, only slightly varying in degrees. But as we said before, there is an art in long-range economic planning. So this psychological stuff that they're doing it for a long time. So it's still going on. You must keep your eye and thoughts on the female and the offspring of the horse and the N-word. A brief discourse in offspring development will shed light on the way to sound economic principles. So, offspring development, programming the children. You got to take a look at how your schools are being run. Believe me, I know. And what they're teaching you in school. So be aware of that, parents. Okay, let's continue here. Yeah, and he's going to have a brief discourse. So I'm going to pay attention to the generation. Okay, here we go. Pay little attention to the generation of original breaking, but concentrate on future generations. There you go. Now, I remember, we'll break there. There's more. It's a long letter, but it's worth getting into. I remember watching a documentary on corporations, and they had a motto, cradle to the grave. So when children are born, they're getting suckled on the corporate/government teat, as they might say. All right, let's continue. Therefore, if you break the female mother, she will break the offspring in its early years of development. And when the offspring is old enough to work, she will deliver it up to you. Notice there's no, they're not even talking about the men here, or fathers. They want fathers out of the way. And this is not, of course, not an attack on women. But ladies, and of all races, you're being programmed. So be aware of that. Right? Basically, okay, so let's continue. She will deliver it up to you, for her normal female productive tendencies will have been lost in the original breaking process. For example, take the case of the wild stud horse, a female horse and an already infant horse, and compare the breaking process with two captured N-word males in their natural state, a pregnant N-word woman with her infant offspring. Take the stud horse and break him for limited containment. Completely break the female horse until she becomes very gentile, whereas you or anybody can ride her in her comfort, breed the mare and the stud until you have the desired offspring. Then you can turn the stud to freedom until you need him again. Train the female horse where she will eat out of your hand. Okay? So he's talking about training the females so that the females will do whatever they say. And of course they refer themselves, they're the power structure, right? Government, corporation heads, you name it. And she will in turn train the infant horse, the children, to eat out of your hand also. Again, welfare, and also question the college system, ladies and gentlemen. Right? I'm beginning to learn it's a big problem. College debt is a huge problem. I mean, it's appalling. I looked at some of the prices that colleges are charging, the tuitions per year. It's like minimum $50,000 a year for some of these colleges. It's that they should be ashamed for charging that amount. And for what? So your child can go off to college and party and learn how to be a whore? I'm sorry. Did I say that? Yeah, I did.
Yes, I did.
Okay. You got to think about this. I mean, and then what happens? I'm sorry, that was a little harsh, but you know what? It needs to be said. And then these people, and it happens to females more for whatever reason, but it's they're targeting women here, right? Women are much more in college debt than men, and I just a young lady told me that her mother has a friend that is in her 50s and is still paying off college debt. And this is a white woman. So you can imagine. It's affecting all of us. You don't want to be in college debt for that long. I mean, then you're still what, a slave? You still got to work it off. All right, let's continue. Let's see here. Okay, so it says, when it comes to breaking the uncivilized N-word, use the same process, but vary the degree and step up the pressure so as to do a complete reversal of the mind. Okay, so again, mind control, psychology. Take the meanest and most restless N-word, strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male N-words, the female and the N-word infant, tar and feather him. This is a little bit rough, so we should put a disclaimer that this, if you're a young person, this might be a little bit heavy for you. Tie each leg up to a different horse, face in opposite directions, set him afire, and beat both horses to pull them apart in front of the remaining other people. N-words. Okay, that's harsh. That's tough. But this is they did the men so dirty. The next step is to take a bullwhip and beat the remaining N-word males to the point of death in front of the females and the infant. Don't kill him, but put the fear of God in him, for he can be useful for future breeding. Okay? All right, the breaking process of the African woman. Take the female and run a series of tests on her to see if she will submit to your desires willingly. Test her in every way, because she is the most important factor for good economics. So William Lynch is saying that women are the most important factor for good economics. Interesting. So ladies, you are very important in this whole, this whole thing. So pay attention. If she shows any sign of resistance in submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her to extract the last bit of resistance out of her. Take care not to kill her, for in doing so, you spoil good economics. Have you noticed that there are more women put in managerial positions since the 1970s than men? There are more women being put in power and in high places, and I hate to say this, but I think it's by design. And I think you guys can ponder that. When in complete submission, she will train her offspring in the early years to submit to labor when they become of age. Okay. Yeah, teach your young boys to just go get a job, Don't go out and start your own business. Work for the powers that be. Right? Yeah, we'll keep giving them video games and we'll underpay them. Okay? Here we go. Understanding is the best thing. Therefore, we shall go deeper into the area of the subject matter concerning what we have produced here in this breaking process of the female N-word. We have reversed the relationship in her natural civilized state, that she would have a strong dependency on the uncivilized N-word male. In other words, it says it right here that they want women to not depend on the man. Feminism. People, it's a tactic to keep everybody dysfunctional and keep everybody working. These colleges are making money hand over fist. And a lot of these colleges are run by, the same people that are running the corporations, right? How many colleges get donations from the Rockefeller Foundation or the this and this foundation, or all these corporate entities, and they get these, especially females, to think that they don't need a man, and as long as they have a PhD, they're going to go out and conquer the world. And then they get this PhD and they realize they're not getting the jobs what they want. They're in debt. It's all right here. They were planning this 300 years ago, more than that. So that's something to think about, especially if you're young and you haven't. I'd definitely question that dream college where you're going to be $150,000 in debt with a world arts and cultures degree that's not going to get you, please think about it. Think about it. Okay, let's continue. And she would have a limited protective tendency towards her independent male offspring and would raise male offsprings to be dependent like her. Welfare. Nature had provided for this type of balance. We reversed nature by burning and pulling a civilized N-word apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, all in her presence. So it's talking about torturing men in front of the women. By her being left alone, unprotected, with the male image destroyed, the ordeal caused her to move from her psychological dependent state to the frozen independent state. Frozen meaning like, I don't know what to do. It's like being terrified. In this frozen psychological state of independence, she will raise her male and female offspring in reversed roles. What's going on today, everybody? Role reversal. Do you know they're promoting in high schools? They have like a male pageant for senior males, and they have a dress where the males dress up in dresses. And this is just becoming. Now, as a man and as, if father, would you want your son doing that? Okay, so you got to be careful what's going on in these schools, everybody. And the male image destroyed, right? Have you noticed a lot of times you don't, like, you see like, take for example LeBron James. And, LeBron James is great. I don't have a problem with LeBron James. But they always show him giving honor to his mother. It's like no father around. Right? You see it all the time. So they want the male image destroyed. That's how they keep. This is what William Lynch is saying, how they're going to keep slaves. Right? One psychological tactic. So let's move on. For fear of the young male's life, she will psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. Right? Look at all these guys that are, they all want to play sports, but they don't want to pursue other, more intellectual pursuits. All right? They dangle that carrot. You too can make millions of dollars playing sports, and I love sports, but, you know what I'm talking about. Because she has become psychologically independent, she will train her female offsprings to be psychologically independent, right? And when he says psychologically independent, meaning they're not relying on the father. Okay. What have you got? You got an N-word woman out front and the N-word man behind and scared. You've heard that term simping lately. Right? This is a perfect situation of sound sleep and economics, right? So this is a way, he's saying it'll make the slave owners sleep better. Before the breaking process, we had to alertly be on guard at all times. Now we can sleep soundly. For out of frozen fear, this woman stands guard for us. Wow. Wow, think about that. You think this tactic still affects us today? It absolutely does. You cannot get past her early slave molding process. Oh, I'm sorry. He cannot get past her early slave molding process, meaning the male. He is a good tool, now ready to be tied to the horse at a tender age. By the time an N-word boy reaches the age of 16, he is soundly broken in and ready for a long life of sound and efficient work in the reproduction of a unit of good labor force, right? Then again, human resources. Continually through the breaking of uncivilized, savage N-word. Now, when he says uncivilized, savage N-word, he's meaning, strong males. That's what that code word is. By throwing the N-word female into a frozen psychological state of independence, by killing the protective male image. By killing of the protective male image. That's key. I was reading an article, and this was it was a white girl, right? And it was an article in I have it somewhere, but it was right on Yahoo's front page, and it said, "Father wants to protect his daughter, but." The article was implying that the daughter doesn't need his protection, but thanks for the attempt, Dad. We know you mean well. I mean the psychology of it. They're basically saying that fathers don't need to protect their children. You know what damage that's doing to especially girls. These girls get out there and they think that. Yeah. It's right here. Okay, so let's continue. So the killing of the protective male image, and by creating a submissive, dependent mind of the N-word male slave, we have created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever, unless a phenomenon occurs and reshifts the position of the male and female slaves. So he's saying that we can keep you as slaves unless something happens where the men go back to being men and the females go back to being females. We show what we mean by example. Take the case of the 2 economic slave units and examine them closely. All right, continuing on. Okay, because I know this is deep. The N-word marriage. We breed 2 N-word males with 2 N-word females. Then we take the N-word males away from them and keep them moving and working. Okay, so again, what do we have in America, right? Longer hours, less pay. Right? Let them breed, but then keep the men working longer and longer hours. Say one N-word female bears an N-word female, and the other bears a male. Both, I'm just going to leave this N-word stuff out. That's getting pretty stupid. Both females, being without influence of the male image, frozen with an independent psychology, so there's your feminism, independence, but frozen meaning like you're just sitting there like, what do I do? Okay, will raise their offspring into reverse positions. The one with the female offspring will teach her to be like herself, independent and negotiable. And he goes on in parentheses, we negotiate with her, meaning the powers that be. Through her, by her, we negotiate her at will. Black Lives Matter? We know Black Lives Matter was funded by George Soros, and he's using black females. Interesting. You can just ponder that. The one with the male offspring, she being frozen with a subconscious fear for his life, will raise him to be mentally dependent and weak but physically strong. In other words, body over mind. Now, in a few years, when these 2 offsprings become fertile for early reproduction, we will mate and breed them and continue the cycle. This is good, sound, and long-range comprehensive planning. Warning, possible interloping negatives. Earlier, we talked about the non-economic good of the horse and the N-word in their wild and natural state. We talked out the principle of breaking and tying them together for orderly production. Furthermore, we talked about paying particular attention to the female and her offspring for orderly future planning. Then more recently, we stated that by reversing the positions of the male and female, we created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever unless a phenomenon occurs and reshifts them back to their original male and female positions. You notice there's just all this attack on men being men and women being women. They don't want that phenomenon to reverse back to the original positions. Our experts warned us about the possibility of this phenomenon occurring, for they say that the mind has a strong drive to correct and recorrect itself over a period of time. If I can't touch some substantial original historical base, and they advise us that the best way to deal with the phenomenon is to shave off the brute's mental history and create a multiplicity of phenomenon of illusions. Wow. One of the biggest problems with black folks that I've been told is that they don't really know their history. Look at this. Shave off the brute, meaning the male's mental history, and create a multiplicity of phenomena of illusions. Movies, TV, video games. Oh, girl, you can have it all. Fantasy worlds, Disney programming. Right? So that each illusion will twirl in its own orbit, something similar to a floating balls in a vacuum. Man, it's almost like evil genius type stuff. Next one. The creation of multiplicity of phenomenon of illusions, fantasies, entails the principle of crossbreeding the N-word and the horse. This is getting kind of creepy. As we stated above, the purpose of which is to create a diversified division of labor, therefore creating different levels of labor and different values of illusion at each connecting level of labor. Man, this guy put a lot of thought into this. Is he talking about genetic engineering? Interesting. The results of which is the severance of the points of original beginnings for each sphere illusion, since we feel that the subject matter may get more complicated, as we proceed in laying down our economic plan concerning the purpose, reason, and effort of crossbreeding horses and people. We shall lay down the following definition terms for future generations. Okay? Orbiting cycle means a thing turning in a given path. Axis means upon which or around which a body turns. Phenomenon means something beyond ordinary conception and inspires awe and wonder. Can you say movies, TV? Okay. Larger than life situations. Do you ever notice like these hospital and lawyer shows, they just make it seem like those professions every day is an adventure? Oh man, that's a package worth opening, but that's going to take another whole other thing. Awe and wonder, man. We can think of examples of that. Like I said, movies and TV, sports stars, right? Multiplicity means a great number. Sphere means globe. Crossbreeding a horse means taking a horse and breeding it with an ass, and you get a dumb, backward ass, long-headed mule that is not reproductive or productive by itself. Crossbreeding people means taking so many drops of good white blood and putting them into as many black women as possible. Okay. Do you know that Columbus encouraged his soldiers to breed with the Indians that they, right, and take Indian wives and stuff? So this guy's encouraging it here, and I saw, I guess the word would be expose that a lot of Caucasians were encouraged to take on American Indian wives and so on. So there's something to that. Okay. Now men have seed. We'll leave it at that. All right. We'll talk about it. We'll get into that another time. But that's interesting. Varying the drops of good white blood by the various tone you want, and then letting them breed with each other until another cycle of color appears as you desire. So this is really quite disgusting. All right, they're talking about breeding. And that's just the harsh reality of what was going on back then. Okay? Listen to this guy. I mean, it's like an evil genius. All right, let's continue. What this means is this. Put the black folks and the horse in a breeding pot, mix some asses and some good white blood, and what do you get? You get a multiplicity of colors of ass, backward, unusual black folks running, tied to a backward ass, long-headed mule, the one productive of itself, the other one sterile. The one constant, the other dying. We keep the black constant. I'm just trying to clean up the language here. For we may replace the mules for another tool. Both mule and black man tied to each other, neither knowing where the other came from, and neither productive for itself, nor without the other. And that's harsh. Okay, they're talking about genetic manipulation. So they had genetic manipulation back then. And if you read some of the ancient texts, they had genetic manipulation back in the ancient days. There's even evidence that like a lot of those mythical creatures in Greek and Roman times before that were actual genetic creations, right? They were manipulations. All right, one thing I've learned in my life is, there's not really, history repeats itself and there's nothing new under the sun in a lot of ways. All right? Because we're all in this weird psychological state. All right? And that's why my show is called Unplugged Wisdom, right? We're trying to unplug people here. All right, next thing, last thing, we're almost done here. I know it's been a long one. Control the language. Crossbreeding completed for further severance from their original beginning. Again, he stresses that he doesn't want black folks to know their original beginning. Okay, keep that. We talked about it. Hey, we talked about it last time. All right, King James and other history. Let's continue. We must completely annihilate the mother tongue of both the new black man and the new mule. That's wonderful. He just refers to them as mules now. And institute a new language that involves the new life's work for both. You know languages is a particular institution. It leads to the heart of a people. The more a foreigner knows about the language of another country, the more he is able to move through all levels of that society. Therefore, if a foreigner is an enemy of the country, to the extent that he knows the body of the language, to that extent is the country vulnerable to attack or invasion of a foreign culture. For example, if you take a slave, if you teach him all about your language, he will know all your secrets, and he is then no more a slave. You can't fool him any longer. For example, if you told a slave that he must perform in getting out our crops, and he knows the language well, he would know that our crops didn't mean our crops, and the slavery system would break down, for he'd relate on the basis of what our crops really mean. So you have to be careful in setting up the new language for the slaves if you set up the new language for the slaves would soon be in your house talking to you man to man, and that is death to our economic system. In addition, the definitions of words or terms are only a minute part of the process. Values are created and transported by communication through the body of the language. A total society has many interconnected value systems. All the values in the society have bridges of language to connect them for orderly working in the society. But for these language bridges, these many value systems would sharply clash and cause internal strife or civil war, the degree of the conflict being determined by the magnitude of the issues or relative opposing strength in whatever form. For example, if you put a slave in a hog pen and train him to live there and incorporate in him to value it as a way of life, okay, so he's talking about putting black folks in ghettos here. If you really read between the lines, and having them want to stay in the ghetto, not letting them see how much better they can really have it. Okay, so a lot of these rap songs that glorify the ghetto, me personally, looks like it's all part of the plan. That whole thug life and everything, they glorify it. That's what he's talking about here. The biggest problem you would have out of him is that he would worry about provisions to keep the ghetto clean. Or the same hog pen, meaning ghetto, and make a slip and incorporate something in his language whereby he comes to value a house more than he does his hog pen, you got a problem. He will soon be in your house. So this guy's, and this is it, but at the end here, he's talking about psychologically keeping people in poor neighborhoods, ghettos, and not valuing living in nice places. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I mean, this was harsh, but I hope you can see how it works today. They're still doing stuff like this. And it's so important to free your mind from this stuff and start seeing it more. I mean, we all have to work, we all have to get out there and but free your mind. That's the first thing. So I know this was a harsh one, but I and we're going to talk about other topics that won't be as harsh, but please, this is very valuable. So hit that like button and subscribe, because we're going to have more content coming your way. And again, soon I'll have like a PayPal or something set up. So if you want to donate, because there's going to be a lot of lessons. If you like one lesson, put some money in the tip jar, because it does take a lot of work to set this up. And if you don't like the lesson, you don't have to pay. All right, so I appreciate your attention. I'm your humble servant, Mr. Smeef, and we'll see you next time.